more substantial causes.
That deshi diag ta jetel ta shi jeo tes shi jeo chito momboji yares.
And when we talk about that temporary kind of happiness, of course, we're talking more about that happiness that we enjoy from good outer conditions and so forth.
Ta ina shi je ta kare mo kare ina ta te tane deshi ji cha jel ro do mando asida no self ke dewa chimbo chadi yares.
But of course, even when we think about those outer conditions, we also know that whether we're able to achieve a lasting happiness from that, whether longer or shorter, that also depends upon our state of mind.
Ta tende ji za ta nga zo ta tri zo ta ya ka tri zo se chimde ka chembo te ta tri nga zo se page tembo chaya se so da bo ja thoya ge ten ta.
So in terms of our topic today on mindfulness, these are teachings that are going to teach us how to stabilize and still our mind. And in this way, these are teachings that will help us to protect our mind. So in terms of the practicality of these instructions, we can do this seeking our own happiness. We can do this maybe thinking a little bit about the happiness of others. But if we want to be this, if we want this to be sort of meaningful in the vastest way, we want to think about our motivation, and we want to establish a motivation that is expansive.
Ta gewa to mgewa se de ta mge issue le yin ta ngaro so le la wo chi ko to ne ta komba chi mo ya yi ta yo ngin ju se de chwa ji le le la wo to ne do ya res.
So we talk about the causes for this from the point of view of wholesome and unwholesome karma. And when we look at what is unwholesome, we can see that when we engage in those unwholesome activities, this happens very naturally. They're very complete at the beginning, the middle, and the end.
Ta te mge issue le de se ja ka mar ngan zo kan ge so page mge sha wal ta na le la wo chi ha ko to ya res yo wa la yo page ma mo to ne yo ya ngi je yu tembo tan ju la yo page.
And because of that habituation towards what is unwholesome or negative, we see that we don't even really have to think. We know exactly how to prepare for the action, how to engage it, and how to conclude it. However, when we talk about those virtuous actions, when we talk of actions that are wholesome, they lack that force of habituation. So it's because they lack that force of habituation that we have to pay attention to how to establish the beginning, the motivation, the actual action, and the end. And so we need to establish these motivations in the beginning, the middle, and the end when we engage in the activities of hearing, contemplation, and meditation at home. And the nice thing too is that if we pay attention to our motivation, even if the session doesn't go well, even if we are distracted and so forth, because of the motivation that we established at the beginning, we'll still be able to accumulate a powerful positive potential. So it's also said that, of course, when we engage in our practices of hearing, contemplation, and meditation at home, we definitely are able to accumulate merit or positive potential from that. But the nice thing about gathering together to listen to the teachings at the same place or at the same time is that through the force of us coming together with those positive intentions, because of the basis of more people, then we are able to accumulate a greater merit.
다시 또 뉴니즈만 샤도고요 말에. 처마 도도 첨보지요나 괜히 대세시. 여슈 체제 샤도고요 아레스.
So it's just like if you want to clean the dust or the trash out of your house, if you have a broom that only has a few long straws within it, you're not going to be able to clean very effectively. But if that straw is bundled together, then you'll be able to move that dust and purify very easily.
어떠니자 어서노치 돈을 써서 논이 공부자니 주대 그렇게 겨와라야로 어떻게 그게 지체 뭐지 요아레스.
And if we can think about all of these processes and establish the correct motivation, then when we come to listen to the teaching, or when we prepare to listen to the teaching, it is said that every step that we take towards the place where the teaching is being given, this foundation of merit.
아니 다 인디네 버라야 그 제시 저러서 저와도 드리시나 어떤 돈은 강갈패도 요아레스.
So as much as possible, Geshe is then going to explain this teaching on the 4 close placements of mindfulness, but he really encourages you, those of you who are here, but also those of you who are at home, you can send the question to Dave. Please do ask questions, and then we can all learn together.
다 어떤지래 다 대우더니 끊고 같이 모이 비즈니스는 뭐지 다배 야가 라마 조지 바데 아드샤스는 다 같이 뭐지 아니 저다 별페는 다 디가 다 버게 가르쳐 가르노 다 롱가도 마스 할레 비다 보모 지테 아레스 벨라
Loso. So then there was a very great master named Lord Atisha, who was actually a master from Bengal. And he came to Tibet at the time when there was confusion about the teachings. And on the basis of his activity, they were able to establish a clear path of spiritual practice.
비단은 끊어도 같이 뭐 간지스레 잘라바이는 빼나가로서 시지마다바이나 시지다 사회지다바이나 다 뒤에 시지 다 매기 시지다바이나 대긴 되고도 그러 강가 매지용 그래스 다 뒤에라고 지 마사절다바이나 뒤에 되고 강가 야가도 로마라서 강가 뒤에 내서 지용 그래스.
So Atisha said that actually the motivation is very important. It is just like the seed at the beginning. So we know that if we plant the seed for a medicinal or for an edible plant, then we will have a good result. But similarly, we know that if we plant a poisonous seeds, then the leaves, the branches, and the fruits of that tree will be poisonous. So if we think about this, the motivation from this analogy of planting the seed, this will help us to understand why it's very important.
다 용인 주에서 총화지는 가로서 내가 때문에 다 알아 못한 도근데 왔어. 어다 던지시 예상 안 듣고노 그게 여보지 게이세 삐다보 여보지 시다바시아 발랑가로서 셀라 소원담만다 노톤담만다 처음에변해서 뭐지연 우디가 그게 여보지 뭐지요 말이스.
So then also when we establish the motivation, one of the challenges that we face is that when we begin the session, our mind may be going all over the place. We may be having distractions, discursive thoughts, and so forth. So if we don't do something to still the mind first, then the motivation will not be able to come out well.
어떤 가로서 단다이나요 버게 겨와테 삐다보지도 땜보지도 여보진도 그 요아래 대전도 맞에 다 무턴에 사세 땜보지도 레레진도 하시아 발라 어다 버게 세 좀마지서 같이 모레스 가디나.
So purifying these the mind of distraction is something that is very important from the point of view of being able to set the right intention so that we accumulate that virtuous karma, but also from the point of view of being able to maintain that stability of our focus or our concentration during the session.
다 된도네 다 돈본 늘로되래. 노진 늘로되 같이 모서 요아래 다 들긴 안조 강가로로 다 그상 걸어 돼요. 이사 다 되이나 인터뷰 요아래. 야와 셴바 유도세 요아래.
So normally at this point we would talk a little bit about to still the mind, what is the posture of meditation. So normally if we were at the center, right, mostly it would be cushions on the floor, but because everybody is seated in chairs here, the traditional Vairochana posture won't really work. So we can talk about sitting in the posture of Buddha Maitreya. So of course, you know, in that way it's not a problem. So what we want to do is, even though we're in a chair, we try to sit upright.
다 모두 다 생제 관계 된다라 요복 바마 용기 있습니다.
So you'll notice though that Buddha Shakyamuni, so the historical Buddha, and also most of the Buddhist deities, they're sitting in the cross-legged posture. So why is it that you usually see Maitreya kind of sitting on sort of like a bench with his feet downward in sort of the Western style? This is said to represent the fact that he is ready to come very quickly when it is time for him to enter the world as the next Buddha.
수지초된데 때말 할레비 비다보 야보 차터는 다 야체 더운도 더서나도 계속 왔어. 대면하게 단단히 있어서 야보잖아. 하고 봐 자와 준비까라더니 오버게 야보 차야.
So it is said that actually if we are not perhaps able to practice exactly in the way to be able to achieve enlightenment based upon the time when the teachings of Buddha Shakyamuni are in the world, if we create the causes, if we amass merit, we may be able to meet with the Buddha Maitreya when he comes in the future. So whether we are sitting kind of seated up, whether we are seated on the floor cross-legged, the most important thing is that the back is relatively upright. And the reason for this is that the body and the mind are interconnected. And we also understand that when the body is upright, then the winds can flow through the chakras properly. And so the wind and the mind are also related. And that's why it's good to have this upright posture. So when the body is kind of straight like an arrow, then the chakras or the energy channels within our body are also upright and straight. And it is said that when the channels are kind of upright and open, this allows the prana or the wind to flow freely. And this is said to be good for purifying the blood, for purifying all sorts of other physical ailments. So as we said, to establish that motivation, we want our body and mind to be in a relaxed state. So let us just take a moment to do a brief meditation together to establish a peaceful state in the body and mind. And just think that whatever I came with today, whatever disturbing thoughts, whatever mental projections, these are just like waves on the surface of the ocean. Once the wind stops blowing, those waves dissolve and the ocean becomes calm. Through this state of calmness, the body is at ease, the mind is vast and relaxed. And think to establish this peace and stability of body and mind even further, I'm going to draw my attention to my breath and think, as I breathe in, I'm aware I'm breathing in. As I breathe out, I'm aware I'm breathing out. And you don't have to if you don't want to, but if you'd like to, try to count 21 inhalations and exhalations. And also just breathe naturally how you would normally breathe. Don't try to edit your breath so that you're breathing deeper than normal or more softly than normal. Just allow that breathing to be natural.
소화 현다 노도 현다 가르 레바 이나요 거로 도노마트 바치 주도 마치는 양아레스.
And so, whatever distracting thoughts might arise, whatever distracting feelings arise, don't be disturbed, but just let them fall away.
셀 소화 중에 가르 이나며 바 돈영을 텔레차서 소마다지.
And think that whatever sort of feelings might have been in my mind before, whatever sort of mental state I came with here today, that now this is peaceful and I'm in a state of like almost neutrality, a state of equanimity.
세 돈영 뭐를 줘봐대. 다 사지도 마스는 사지 좀마 할래 아버지 섬마지.
And appreciate that state of peaceful equanimity. And appreciate that clarity that that peaceful equanimity brings. Clear knowingness.
매일 레바야 버티 뒤인데 사회 다 너지도 만나와 사회 벌써 소바지 딱이 섬마지.
And think, now in this calm state, what I want to do is plant a seed of something positive, of something wholesome, so that I can make the most of this human body and human intelligence.
디세 튼틀레가 제한테 졸라 만다와 다 롱제 관계에 대지 벌써 수반 주야지가 다 저런도 같이 내가 지금 섬마지.
I think in the short time we have together today, I don't want this time to be wasted. I want to be able to use this time to place the seeds for perfect happiness in the minds of myself and others.
매일 레바 야본티가 소소 야보 제바이나 세코로 야보까지 쇼는 트바이나요 다 저도야가 내서 강가트 소소 라바는 디스.
And have the confidence that because of this human brain and this human intelligence, if we still the mind and we try to lead to the mind to what is wholesome, to what is positive, we definitely have the capacity, the ability to be able to do that.
예, 내서 야가 가르 이나에 대르지 시라가 바 리바시네라. 아니 가디나 세 샤와지도 렐레치온 거리 다 무세 야보티도 섬마지.
And also have the confidence that as we cultivate the wisdom in our mind, we'll be able to understand how things really are. We will be able to more easily cultivate positive qualities. And in this way, we will be able to have a more peaceful mind. So we'll pause the meditation there. So this was like the sort of preliminary practice to just establish that stillness and that motivation. Yeah, and so just a note, it doesn't have to be the breath that you cultivate here with your meditation. You can actually use any focus, any object of focus that you want. You're just trying to focus on something single-pointedly. We just suggested the breath as a beginning because that's something that's immediately accessible. So, and also in terms of how we do that meditation on the breath, the main point isn't counting to a particular number, but the main point is that clarity of the attention. So if we are paying attention to that sensation of the breath, doing that with clarity and awareness. Similarly, if we are counting the breath, doing that with clarity and awareness.
미타테 가레나 미 가르자는 그러다. 단단한 우유테 좋아하러was. 다 디가 조 가레 용기 요아레서는 시라데 베게 시워지 시라를 다 여보지 요아가 내가 지시를 요아레스.
And through that attention, and as we said, it doesn't have to be the breath as your object of focus. It can be any number of objects, but through that attention, the idea is that as we maintain that, we are able to bring forth wisdom.
다 템바도 시라 뇽도 버게 여보서 다시레스. 디슬 녀본다고 슬 내가시기 요아레서는 말어서 말이 발라 다 녀본도 그 요아텔 따다노 요아레스.
And when we are able to use that attention to bring forth wisdom, with those forces of mindfulness and wisdom together, we are very easily able to uproot the affliction of ignorance.
다 갈래도 말이 반년보 슈치른도 그 요아르테네 디기 신다고 단단히 세 초아 잡고 먹기 위해서는 레레가 안에 놓고 요아레스.
So of course later on, right, in Buddhist practice, we have to cultivate sort of more vigorous antidotes to ignorance. But just this first kind of moment of relaxed awareness, we're already beginning to counter it.
어때 같이 뭐 지ren도 와서가 조지 아니 다 디가 노토도 초아 잡고 연다 가리나 파 과금메스.
거기메스.
그 사람아
제제제.
이시야 디가 셰동그 녀몬도야 다 그게 사지도 마스는 같이 제기 와레스.
And also by when those distractions arise, right? When those distractions or discursive thoughts arise, not thinking, oh, I immediately have to stop those, right? Just allowing them to rise and fall away. Why do we take that approach? Because this prevents aversion from arising. Sometimes when we press too hard to stop, an aversion can arise.
초아 잡고 뭐 초알 깔레메바 릴 깔레메바 셀 깔레메바 초알 깔레메바 초아 잡고 그거요 말레스.
And in this way, we understand that whether a point of attention is the body, mind, feelings, or phenomena, we don't have to have like this strong attitude of pushing.
셰도 세나가 옐 네바시기 마코사로 콘도치로 와스.
그렇죠.
다 단다 티가 나 과금이 사티 이마 갈래 나 세체 슬이나 네바시기 사텔레선 셰도 녀몽이나 티니 용이 와스.
And also the pushing out isn't the antidote. So for example, in the meditation, if an aversion is arising, right? We just allow that feeling of aversion to arise and fall away. And what we'll find is that through allowing it to arise and fall away, it doesn't solidify itself, right? That aversion won't solidify itself into a wish to harm sentient beings. In fact, when we just note it and with wisdom, note it and allow it to fall away, what will happen is eventually that aversion will dissipate. And instead, we will think, I don't want to harm sentient beings. Yeah. So we're establishing in our mind the basis, right, to cultivate the opponent to that aversion. Yes. And we also noticed that when we did this breathing meditation, we were doing this mindfulness or this awareness on the breath in a mood of acceptance, right? Just breathing in the way that we normally do. If we wanted to sort of breathe really deeply and more strongly, of course, we could do that, but we didn't. And also, if we wanted to breathe really softly, we could do that, but we didn't take this approach. And that mood of acceptance, of just letting the breath be what it is, however we're breathing in that moment, that is an antidote to attachment, which is another one of those three poisons or one of those afflictions.
단 대처가 니뭐 따따도 이거 말이 단다 좋아하고 말이야 말이 헬레치는 누구야 왔어.
And so, of course, right now we're not applying the sort of forceful antidotes to attachment and aversion, but we can see how by changing our approach, our way of thinking, we're cultivating those gently.
대처세는 나를 야포트 그건도 아니 저부터 그건도에서 그 좋아하고 버지고 돈이 용 그거 왔어.
So that feeling of attachment, right, to the breath or something else is, I need it to be the best possible, or I need that object that is attractive, or I need to do well at this. We just need to let go of that.
다때 미터 소소소 따지지 텐데프게 좋아하고 먹기 위해 돈이 거 나한테 좋아도 그미 야가지 저기 슈치 뭐지 저기 되게 잠만 뒤와서 콜레레 가리나 대자기 하레스.
So we're going to let the breath be what it will be, and we will pay attention to the breath being as it is. We won't think it's good. We won't think it's bad. We don't need to think I need to change how I'm doing it. Just that acceptance is already an antidote to attachment.
달라마 뭐지기도 대대 자면 다 남으러 왔어. 다 할레베테 고자 아침부터 비타버스가 생간지 되지라스.
So these sort of preliminary kind of ways of thinking about things, this kind of mindfulness awareness meditation, in certain schools of Buddhism, the lamas really emphasize this, and they think that just that awareness is enough. But this isn't really the view held in our school, or Geshe doesn't really agree with that view necessarily. It's not to say that it's not beneficial to be able to have a peaceful mind, a mind that is in equanimity. We're not saying it's not beneficial. It's a very effective and skillful means, especially when we're feeling nervous, especially when we're feeling upset, especially when we're not feeling ourselves, to just be able to relax into that natural state. That's a wonderful way to deal with those problems. But but it's just the foundation that lays forth the foundation for the work that we need to do to sort of more vigorously uproot those afflictions of attachment, anger, and ignorance. And also this awareness, this kind of bare awareness approach to meditation, it's also a tool for life, right? If we try to use it when we're feeling nervous, when we're feeling stressed, we'll see that it does bring kind of an immediate benefit. But it's not the focus of our talk today, right? It's not just this kind of, I guess we could say, secular approach to mindfulness meditation. It is actually the approach of the four foundations or the four close placements of mindfulness. Yes. So when we talk about the four close placements of mindfulness, the first thing to understand is that these are actually attainments. So great meditators, great yogis and yoginis, they attain a close placement of mindfulness. Now, we haven't yet attained those. However, right, we can still practice them. So, for example, we haven't achieved bodhicitta yet, right? That mind that is constantly working towards enlightenment for the benefit of sentient beings. We don't have that mind of love, wishing beings to have happiness and the cause. We don't have that mind of compassion, wishing beings to be free of suffering and its cause all the time. But we can experience those when we bring them into focus. So when we talk about the close placements of mindfulness, mindfulness is that awareness. But the close placement actually implies that that awareness is infused with wisdom. Sherabdang dempegi dempa.
미미 temba nyeja sena temba chibol ko yo mares shira du nyodo go thone anes yechingol tembo deba asiklares.
So when we talk about mindfulness, right, it's that being able to hold the object. But when we talk about a close placement of mindfulness, it's being able to hold our object of attachment with the mind infused by wisdom. That's really what the close placement is referring to.
This one tere ta temba nyeja tele ta shire shiyare skorola litemba nyeja ani chowa temba nyeja se temba nyeja chi temba nyeja.
And so when we speak about these close placements of mindfulness, they are normally 4 in number. Close placements of mindfulness on the body, close placements of mindfulness on feeling, close placement of mindfulness on the mind, and close placement of mindfulness on phenomena.
Ta temba nyeja go jatu tele ta rapa chu yara was teo kale yungere tene ya dangin dine zo ta ya shu da wat aleke che yungere tene cheser choros to wat to diona.
Yeah, and so of course there are ways to kind of just meditate on these 4 in kind of an experiential way, but that's not kind of the most refined way of approaching them. So what Geshe is going to do is kind of maybe put forward yakshadi marshegire. He's going to put forward the ideal way to approach these 4 close placements of mindfulness, and then if you have questions afterwards, we can explore the other way a bit more. Because actually there's also some sort of easier, you could almost say maybe more practical ways of cultivating these, but we're going to present them from the ideal perspective first. So we could talk about, for example, if we take feelings as the object, the close placement of mindfulness on feelings when we're experiencing a very strong emotion, but also the close placement of mindfulness on feelings when we're experiencing a very subtle emotion. But to really cultivate the 4 close placements of mindfulness in a way that will bring forth realization, we need to have a close placement of mindfulness that is infused with shamatha and vipassana, so with constant meditative concentration and special insight. And so we need to have that concentration in the sense of calm abiding in place, and that shamatha, and we need to have the vipassana, in other words, that wisdom sort of in place. Then, with those 2 factors in place, if we engage in a close placement of mindfulness on one of the 4 objects, it will be a very high quality meditation. So why do we need, before we can really do the close placement of mindfulness, this single-pointed, stable concentration, or this very refined sort of wisdom? This goes back to that wish that we said that we all shared at the beginning of the session, which is to experience a stable happiness that is completely untouched by suffering. And that wish for happiness is something that is shared with every single sentient being, even those tiny ants that are so busy running back and forth. They are doing this with the thought of achieving some type of happiness. So all of those beings, even the animals, whether big animals or small animals, right down to even the tiniest insects, all of the energy that they're expending, all of that busyness that we observe, they are seeking some kind of happiness. However, unfortunately, and we say this with compassion, the animals don't have the same sort of mental faculties that we do. They don't have the same capacity for reasoning that we do. So although they wish for some sort of stable happiness, they aren't really able to cultivate its causes.
샹그로 뭐치 순간도 와서 마음별로 더바지리래 메코노 유데비 가치를 샤와도 드리 리카노 조조도비 가라 코르치 통스테네 텔타네 아제 다 콘솔 로파치야 네바 요나 각기 제함도 와스
Yes, yeah.
아까서라와 드리치마
And also in terms of the help, to help the animals create those causes, that is also something that is very difficult. When His Holiness the Dalai Lama several years ago underwent a surgery in hospital, there were some deer who would come to the windows of his room, and he said he had this feeling of feeling a little bit helpless because he thought, I really want to be able to do something for their benefit, but I'm very limited in terms of what I can do to communicate.
어다 칼라다도 드리티아도 데스 페도도 요아르테네 다 텐다 거기 대시 템버치를 코르서 달 거까요 말와스
So His Holiness saw that, okay, we could give them a little bit of food, or maybe we could protect them somehow, but in terms of like giving them information to actually establish a stable happiness in their mind, wasn't able to do that.
어다 간저도 모른도 근데 와서 어다 텐다 간저 다 템버 드럭 해야 가르에서는 나로서 나세 대야지 단다 세가 요버레스 세대 세가 요버이란 저거를 어찌 전에 세 코로 뒤자 로마로 와스 이나 세대 녀모 요버레 디가레스 간다.
So let's look a little bit at our own situation. We have that we call the self, and we have that we call the capital letter I.
야 나로서 단다 나세 자치 못해 세가 요버레도 와스 세가 요버이나요 인빈지 뒤자 이거 말 세코로 이제 또 노지 뒤자 로마레스.
And that self, or the I, in a way, it is the servant of the mind. And that would be okay, but the problem is that our mind is also a servant. Our mind is a servant of the afflictions.
다 세대 요다 가와야 하는 세대 녀모 요버 저디가레스 다 된니까는 가죠.
So out of these three, of the self, the mind, and the afflictions, where have we identified the problem? We've identified the problem that the mind is the prisoner of the afflictions, or the mind is the servant of the afflictions.
다 네츠 데 코로시워시 조레스 간동에서 하고 요아레스 주주시 다시서나 다 던디자 데바 인 가디나 트자 데바 인 기본 데바니 요아레 때모치 만디와스.
And we can see that very clearly, right? That our mind is the servant of the afflictions because our mind goes wherever those unwholesome thoughts tell us to go, right? So that's the first thing to understand. 난소 욕보디 도와 되네.
세시워스 기본 데바 요아르테는 된 논지지 데바 논지지 유야 만디와스.
And that is the reason that why the happiness that we are striving to achieve, it is never coming forth. So that is the problem that we need to solve if we really want to achieve that happiness. And so this is the reason of why we need those 4 close placements of mindfulness. And so why do we have as the objects of these 4 close placements of mindfulness the body, feelings, mind, and phenomena? It's because these 4 things are immediately identifiable and accessible to us. So the Buddha proposed these because they are immediately objects that are easy to find for meditation. And why do they appear in this particular order? Why do we have the body, feelings, mind, and phenomena? It's because the body is kind of the coarser manifestations, and then they become increasingly more subtle. So it's arranged from coarser to more subtle. So we want to kind of take these objects that we're cultivating in our meditation with the view of like watching, almost like we would watch as an entertainment.
가라 하고 가래서나 나로 스프게 대시 대학 덴바시 사죠. 저 뒤에 하고요. 시라시 되는 거죠.
And what is the ultimate reason for meditating on close placements on the body, feelings, mind, and phenomena? It is because through observing in meditation the body, feelings, mind, and phenomena, we can give rise to a wisdom that comprehends the Four Noble Truths. And those are the path to liberation.
다 계속 배제도야 모치한테도 대도야 말했어. 무슨 레레도 다 드리지게 배제도야 할 때, 쫀로게 생각도 되래.
So when you hear mindfulness presented these days, they're not going to mention that, right? Mindfulness is going to be presented to you as something to be more relaxed. But it's important to understand that the main reason that we need mindfulness is for the realization of those Four Noble Truths.
다 대만여자지 고네 대만여자 하거나 대만여자지 고자나 저 님보 가완도 가래 잘라바이나 아니 무슨와나 좋아한 좀 봐. 아니 대화 많이 발랐더니 대화한 좀 봐. 따바 많이 발라 따반 좀 봐. 아니 다음에 봐실라 다다 잡반 자야가 당가로서 강에 되게 세시요 아레스.
And so how are these four close placements of mindfulness going to help us to bring forth that wisdom that comprehends the Four Noble Truths? It's because actually these four close placements of mindfulness help us to refute mistaken understandings. The mistaken understanding of grasping at what is in nature unclean as being clean, grasping at what is in the nature of suffering as being happiness, grasping at what is impermanent as being permanent, and grasping at what is selfless as having a self. Through refuting these four, that wisdom can be brought forth.
다 딘데와 대인이 민지 하고 가래스. 대만여자 절라테네 대만여자 간디스 하고 그거도 어좀 대따다 저거 님보 간디스 같이 지금도 그래서 다 된간서
So if we want to understand these four close placements of mindfulness, we need to understand how these four close placements of mindfulness are connected with the Four Noble Truths. Right? And if we want to understand how those are connected, we need to understand how these four close placements of mindfulness are related to these four key misconceptions of unclean as clean, impermanent as permanent, in the nature of suffering as happiness, and what lacks a self as having a self.
다 같이 해줄 때다 이 단계 라야 돼. 다시 매 걸릴라고도 뭐야. 와서 또로 그 사단들 해. 기바.
So of course there's many easy ways to apply the close placements of mindfulness, but in terms of in Buddhism why it's really presented and needed, this is the reasoning.
좀 대따다 진짜면 저한테 가제 슈슈는 대파 뭐 야보시에 토소나. 근데 소소 지보게 된다. 다 타바 사태 아래 로토요 아레스.
And it is on the basis of refuting these four misconceptions of what is unclean as clean, what is in the nature of suffering as being in the nature of happiness and so forth, that one is really able to cut through samsara and achieve liberation. So now hopefully you have a clear sort of path of the understanding of how these four misconceptions, the four close placements of mindfulness, and the Four Noble Truths are related. And in fact, it's not so difficult to understand. And so when we engage in our practice of mindfulness, we should understand the four close placements of mindfulness are for refuting these four misconceptions and bringing forth that wisdom that comprehends the Four Noble Truths. And every time we sit down to meditate on mindfulness, if we are aware of this, it is more effective. It's important to know this. Yes, yeah. And so along with that, in terms of why we are practicing, right? We are practicing on the basis of wanting to make the most of this precious human rebirth, this precious human mind and intelligence that we opened with. And when we speak about the first of these, the close placement of mindfulness on the body, we talk about the body in its negative sense. we look at the drawbacks of the physical body. And Geshe said that's why he started with the precious human rebirth and our precious mind and intelligence, because he didn't want to go sort of totally negative, right? But there is a paradox in that there are these positive aspects, but also there are some aspects of the body that are the nature of suffering.
다 리테마냐 고자비칼 미가르에서는 리테레스.
Yeah.
미 리틀 미가르와스.
So when we meditate on the close placement of mindfulness on the body, what is our object of focus? Pretty clear, it's the physical body, right? That is our object of focus.
녜라 소노 가르토 가르세나 테마냐 녜네테 말레 리테마냐 녜네세나 뭐디 다 야쇼데 말레 녜라. 아니 리그네서 간디지두.
So before we arrive at sort of the concentration that allows us to really practice that close placement of mindfulness on the body, we sort of scan through the body to think, what is this body that we inhabit like? What is this physical form that we inhabit like?
시리 농글리 에서나 간디세 지자디 노루르가 아고사라와 소마 노지 콘저그 주사지 누도 모두.
What is this outer aspect of the body like? And if we pay attention to the inner parts of the body, what are those like? And does this physical body that seems so solid and so pinpointable really exist in the way that it appears? If we do this with awareness, what we'll come to understand is that the body is just a collection of many, many, many tiny parts kind of pulled together that make it up. So then, okay, if it's all these parts coming together, what is kind of able to put all of these parts together and create this body? What's behind its formation? And what is the cause of this physical form that we inhabit? What is the cause from the perspective of this life? And what are the subtle causes that go perhaps even beyond that? And through working in this way and understanding this body, its causes, and the fact that it is a collection of parts, then this obsession with the body, this willingness to commit non-virtue to please the body, this will all start to seem to lack common sense. And through seeing sort of the ephemeral nature of this body, then the attachment that arises to the body, and also the attachment that arises to the self that we posit partly in dependence upon that body, this can be decreased, and we'll see that we begin to have less problems. And of course, presenting mindfulness from this perspective, when we talk about the body in terms of grasping what is in nature unclean as being clean, when people first hear that, there's a little bit of resistance, right? That's not necessarily something that people want to hear. But we can't not say that, because it is the fact that we reify this body and see it as something sort of beautiful or handsome or important without considering that many of the causes behind it are unclean. That is what causes us to grasp and to be attached, which leads to many problems. And we can also understand that in terms of how this attachment unfolds, it's from excessive attachment to our body. For example, maybe about how we look, that can also lead to that excessive attachment to the self. And that creates tremendous suffering. And so also that attachment, that excessive attachment to the self, where does that come from? Ultimately, if we trace that back to its source, it comes from that ignorance grasping at the self.
하고서는 말이 받들 반년보야 보지도 다세 그게 때보다 보자야지 그러was.
And if we want to really be able to achieve freedom from suffering, to really be able to achieve liberation, we need to be able to overcome that ignorance grasping at a self.
어디지지 다초 리도 초안이 년도는 그 생년은 가서 거자리 년도자기 이스티가요. 사레스.
다공장이.
매매대세. 초 리도 초안이 년도는 있어.
And so also when we do this mindfulness meditation on the body, we can actually combine aspects of the meditation on the body with aspects of meditation on feelings.
어다 디거때는 덴바적은 시워하고 자송와스 리테만이 공발라 때니 리테 둥아 덴베가 로진이 바지 시워 토야야레스.
And when we pay attention to our body and what's arising in it, we start to realize suffering. And when we start to understand that relationship of suffering, we realize the first of the Four Noble Truths, which is true sufferings. Life is suffering.
둥아레세요 아마다 둥아 덴바레 둥아 마레스 리테.
Yeah. So this body we're not saying is suffering itself, but we are saying that it is in the nature of suffering, or it is endowed with suffering.
둥아 덴바세는 운차테 레도 녜몰 다보자디야 이사 둥아 덴바세요 하레스.
And why is it endowed with suffering? Because this body is very much under the control of karma and affliction.
대송아 어단도거도 알레. 다니빠 초와테만이야.
So then the next one after the body is the close placement of mindfulness on feelings.
그래서 강갈 녜라 대만이자 지갈 녜라 초와 돈요고 돈에 레레 줘야 강갈 요 알다스.
And so Geshe said that in terms of the preliminaries for each of these four close placements on mindfulness, it's always bringing forth a mind of equanimity as a basis.
당이 단다 여쇼든 되시제 기자로was.
Yeah. So we are explaining it from that point of view.
어때? 다 초와 대만이자서는 초와를 지다와이나. 하고서 다 릴리 초와데 때에서 깔래 카가래. 리시볼 줄로야 이제 시고 통거로was.
야무고마선 가이세기가.
미 타라. 리더로 아빠라was.
네.
이제 녜를 고용고 하래.
And so why do we meditate on the body before we meditate on feelings? Because the body has that solidity. So it's an easier object to start with. And then we can go to the more subtle object of feelings.
다니빠 초와 대만이자 다 초와를 지다와이나 초와 대화 그리지. 초와 둥아 그리지. 초와 돈요 그리지. 시고 용고 하래스.
So as we cultivate that mindfulness of feelings, we start to be aware of the different types of feelings that are arising. There are pleasant feelings, unpleasant feelings or suffering feelings, and neutral feelings.
다 초와 대화를 쳐안니라 나로서 다 피쳐바치를 넣냐고 강에 뭐지 대화속이 하래스.
And what we'll see is that when pleasant feelings arise, we're attached to that feeling of pleasantness. And because of that attachment, right, we can be compelled into negative actions to enjoy those pleasant feelings.
니네 지는 안조 칼라도 다 공부도 근데 잘라를 나 쳐바치고요. 잘라기 하래. 니네 지는 데려요 말이지. 니네 지는 초알 줘야 돼.
And so we also talk about, when people talk about attachment in the Buddhist sense, we think you're talking about it being attached to food, or being attached to money, or being attached to having a nice house, or being attached to your position. But actually, what you're really attached to is the pleasant feelings that those conditions give rise to.
나저 실로마도 놀러야 앉아 가지고야 말아봤어. 니네 지는 초아텔을 쳐안니라 가서 다 윤주 갈라 이는데 다 가리나 대용고 하래스.
So what the problem is that this affliction is actually the addiction to the pleasant feeling. And whatever we think is giving rise to that pleasant feeling, whether it's food or wealth or whatever it is, we try to accumulate more in the hope of experiencing that feeling.
때에서 다시선 하고 왔어. 다 등급마시 뭐지 사다 이제 소화기고 중앙이자 대대용도 왔어.
And so for example, if we have an attachment to food, we'll remember how delicious that thing was the last time we ate it. But that deliciousness was that happy feeling we associate with the food. And because of that, we try to get more of it, right? That's how it unfolds.
다 던지지 이자 다 초아 다 초아 대화를 쳐안니라. 아니 저 요다지 하래스.
So it's actually our attachment to pleasant feelings that is the source of many of our problems.
초아 능아를 쳐안니라 요 컨트롤을 줘야 다 요다 뭐지 용거 하래스.
And it's also our impatience, right, to experience suffering that leads to aversion and even anger in terms of this feelings picture.
단내서 던지지 요아이스 다 간주 단다 초와 대만이라 고게야테 지세소 가르레선 단다 소만노지가 초이가 대화 소노도 와테 대화기네 마르다.
And part of the reason that we want to cultivate these close placements on mindfulness is to understand that those pleasant feelings are not actually true happiness.
미미 대화 그거 요 말에서 요 말와스 대화 그거를 가지고 데이트 놀라가 지요 와스 대시 댕이네 마르다 되는 거 고마데서 요.
So we're also not saying that you can't have those pleasant experiences, because of course, it's important to have those pleasures in life and we want to be happy. But what we're saying is those pleasant feelings or those pleasant experiences, those are not causes for that stable, lasting happiness that we're seeking.
Deswa oda desi wasi jorwas pena khala sel chane ta khala tego to ikal khala tombo sabi kala kiwon diwas ta ko khala sai dewa ngine ji ne kaze san ko dewa te ter ndo ko ya kaze san mo dewa chayong diwas.
So how can we know that those pleasant feelings are not true causes of happiness? Well, to use this food example, right? At first, when we eat the food, we have that pleasant taste in our mouth, and that gives rise to that pleasant feeling. So then we may eat more of that food. But what we'll find is that the more of that food we eat, instead of having increasingly pleasurable feelings, we actually begin to have feelings of discomfort, which actually shows us that actually what we thought was the cause of happiness can actually become the cause of suffering.
다 만두야 이네 지바레 야루야 이네 지바레 tombote dewoji 야르센 다 대 요테 사제 초와 대와지 들어왔.
Yeah, and also when we talk about feelings being contaminated, right? Or 사제기 sorwarwa.
그래서 초와 대와지 사제 초와 대와지 들어스.
When we talk about this feeling of happiness being a contaminated feeling of happiness, it's because it lacks that factor of lasting. So when you first sit down, you might feel a sense of relief. But if you stay sitting down for a long period, you'll feel uncomfortable. Similarly, after sitting down for a while, when you stand up, you feel refreshed. But if you had to stand up and never sit for a very long time, you would start to feel suffering. So what the teachings are telling us here is, don't think that what is actually a contaminated happiness, which means that it eventually leads to suffering, is some sort of stable, reliable source of happiness, right? Do not be cheated in that way. And actually, through this through this close placement of mindfulness on feelings, then we can start to be able to develop understandings which will help us to undermine attachment and anger. And at the ultimate level of realization, it is through this close placement of mindfulness on feelings that we can realize gokden, true cessation. That we can understand true origins. So we talked about true sufferings, right? Life is suffering, the first of the Four Noble Truths, and the next one, true origins. So close placement of mindfulness on the body and close placement of mindfulness of feelings are related to the first of the Four Noble Truths, true sufferings and true origins. Out of these Four Noble Truths, true suffering and true origins, these are the two objects to be abandoned. So we're going to take a few minutes now after the explanation to do a short meditation, because we don't have much time left, but to do a short meditation to explore this a little bit. So what we want to do first is just do a scan, a body scan meditation, observing the feelings that are arising in our body from the crown of our head to the very tip of our toes. And then we can pause at different parts of our body, starting from the top, and observe and think, what feelings are arising at this point?
Lapani la tawa, Chapa la tawa, Tego la tawa, Kumbani la tawa, Ramba, Sawan Jovan.
So as we go to different parts of our body, from our head to our torso, to our hands, to our abdomen, to our stomach, to our feet, do the feelings change when we focus our attention on different parts of our body? And so thoughts distracting you from doing this contemplation, right? They may arise, but just don't pay them any attention. Just let them arise and fall away, and return to your object of focusing on these parts of the body. And the second stage of this body scan is to try to turn our attention inwards. So within the head, can we sort of feel where the brain is sitting? Can we sort of feel where the various organs in the body are sitting? And going through the various internal structures of the body from the top to the bottom. And as we go to the more subtle body, we can think of the chakras or the channels, and we can think of the wind or the prana, the energy that moves through those channels. So let's think about this experience. Normally when we see the body, it seems like there's this solid, beautiful, or handsome sort of unitary thing in front of us, right? And depending upon the relationship that we have with our body, some people may look at their body and experience attachment. Some may experience aversion, even disappointment. But from our experience, we know the fluctuating and the sort of fragmented nature of the body. So we know that this lens of attachment that exaggerates the solidity and beauty, or this lens of aversion, they are not based in reality. They are based in ignorance and misunderstanding.
And
So from grasping at the body as existing in a way that it actually doesn't, that kind of false conception, that misunderstanding of how it is, that's part of what compels us to a lot of negative attitudes and actions and accumulates negative karma. And we also know that the feelings that we experience connected with this body and so forth, that those feelings of happiness are contaminated happiness, and that they are just momentary pleasant feelings. They are not lasting. And as we cultivate a deeper understanding of close placement on the body and on feelings, we can understand the two truths to be abandoned of the Four Noble Truths: true sufferings and true origins. So we'll pause the meditation there.
Ota tandi chineta chowa tropa magibe tone yo likawata wa yina chowa yo tedon dawa kara yungu de tawa yina andu chowa maybe likashi chashi la
Yeah.
chowa maybe nasa tani yungu de was tel chowa ya po chaya go page roji wo soya yar se yares
So yabuchaya sana.
andu nasa ri kashi yungu de was likashi chowa me ba dawa chaya tani chowa yungu de was ri chila
Re.
o tandi yina so pilla ba yina o tel chowa kara yungu de tel chowa kara yungu de tana li chowa me ki tan ne ba tani yona o chowa ga ya go pe tu yar
So a sulagi.
Yeah.
So actually also this close placement of mindfulness on the body and on feelings, this can also have a practical application. So people who are experiencing different kinds of illness, they may lose sensation, they may lose feeling in different parts of their body. By directing attention and mindfulness to different parts of the body and contemplating the feelings arising, it is said that actually sometimes the sensation will be restored to those places in the body where it had been lost.
Ota choal to no ota ale kicha mo mo dis was ni do sare
Lasa.
ta yoga ni tere se tema ni ja chi tema ni ja ni ga gude to lode de ya pochi page ser sha go yares
Sem dang che. So now we have talked about close placement of mindfulness of the body and close mindfulness of feelings. So now we are going to talk about close placement of mindfulness of the mind and close placement of mindfulness of phenomena. So while the previous two, body and feelings, were associated with those of the Four Noble Truths that we want to abandon, in other words, the negative aspects, the next two are associated with what we want to take up, in other words, the positive aspects.
ta o dan de do was ta se tema ni ja gomba la teni ha ko sara se tema ni ja ya po chin gomba yina se ro ji ya po te chi ngo shi ngo yares se ro ji ni na te chi ha ko so na ha ko sara wa se ro ji ni na te se ro ji ge sa wa do ta ngaro su kang te de se kang ga lo bo ya ba kde na wo ji ma ma do te mo me ba ji ha ko yares.
So the close placement of mindfulness on the mind is actually one of the most valuable things, because when we place mindfulness on the mind, we will begin to be in touch with the true nature of the mind. And the true nature of the mind is something that is pure and luminous. It is in the nature of pure luminosity. And the unpleasant aspects that cover the mind, these defilements are adventitious. In other words, they are things that can be removed.
ngaro so no kde chi le ba yin o ta ko kadi na tembo dekhe tere sons te ya maro.
So just like when you're inviting a guest into your home, even if they're a troublesome guest, you don't have the feeling that they're going to be here forever, right? You know that their being in your home is just something temporary.
O ta kde te hale be mate se chage chege ta nyo da yo ke chi na yo ko ta ni ka kang yo de ko ro ke re sons ji ya.
Especially if it's a nervous guest who causes you a lot of stress and inconvenience. You're not going to get too upset because you know that they're just there for a short time. Yeah. So we can be patient. It's a little bit easier to be patient when we know that that person's going to be going away soon. What we'll find is that when we direct mindfulness to the mind, the close placement of mindfulness on the mind, those afflictions that seem to be such a part of the mind, they're actually just temporary. So that attachment, that anger, the aversion, even ignorance, they're just like guests that inhabit our mind from time to time, but they are not the true nature of the mind. And so when we understand that they are adventitious, in other words, that they can be removed, we understand that attachment, anger, and ignorance, these afflicted states of being, are something that is temporary. Once we understand that we can completely clear away those afflictions, we are able to achieve the third of the Four Noble Truths, true cessations. So Geshe was saying that some people they connect close placement of mindfulness on the mind with true paths. But the majority of the scholars say that actually the close placement of mindfulness on the mind is connected to true cessations.
뒤에서 와 같이 뭐 통해야 돼. 난 무대에서 아주 토지가 봐 하고서는 나중에 단단도 내가 말해서 알아서 아주 짠이 봐. 가워지는 같이 그랬어.
Once we realize something about true cessations, then our practice of meditation and cultivation becomes a lot easier. Because we see the possibility of the cessation of that problem, of the cessation of the afflictions and of suffering.
난조변은 른거 이거나 세두두 첨보지요. 뭔다고지요. 셋동벌레나 택해서 이잘라바이나 난조 강가 선주 군주 다닌 로그로 와서 진짜. 른거 세두두지요나.
셈도도
셀.
오, 제제.
자 첨보두두지요나.
제제.
셋동벌레나 택 토그레 잘라바이나.
Yeah.
난조 녀도 책 가진 로기션 어즈잖아. 소소소 로그로 와서.
And so once we see those true cessations, and once we see the possibility of those true cessations, it's just like if somebody had placed a very valuable piece of gold on the top of a mountain. We would climb day and night if we knew that the first person to get there would be able to keep that gold.
하고서 다 대노지레스. 무대에서 아주 통소나 다 깔레치네 매바 젠리피 가디이나 가빙원을 하겠냐서 지는 거 알아요.
And once we see true cessations, the possibility that there is really an end to this suffering, then we will be able to do our spiritual practice joyfully and continuously. We'll easily be able to bring forth joyous effort.
야, 원래 이렇게 되어지가 릴깔레 가세요나 깔레트 소화디와 말했어. 그 끼워지게 소화지는 거 알아요.
So it's just like the football. Sorry, we call it soccer here. It's just like the soccer player. I always get so we always, the soccer player, no matter how tired he or she is, right, they are going to continue to play the game without experiencing too much physical discomfort because they really want to win. Once we know that winning is possible in terms of the fact that true cessations, that the cessation to suffering is possible, then the cultivation we have to do, just like that football player, right, it no longer seems so arduous. It seems something doable to do. And we can also have confidence not only because those true cessations, the cessation to suffering is possible, but also confidence in the pure luminosity, the positive nature of our own mind. And in fact, the positive nature of the human mind is something that even the scientists are coming to accept. So for example, in the Mind and Life dialogues with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the scientists are starting to see that the nature, right, the nature of the human mind is not something negative. Actually, its natural state is a positive state endowed with things like love and compassion. So at first, right, the scientists really thought that human beings are negative, they're very self-interested, and they thought that was the natural state of being. So if we understand this, the potential of the human mind together with the potential for the cessation, the end of suffering, then we can proceed in our practice happily. So there's a paradox here, right? Because we talked about the natural state of the mind being pure luminosity, but also being sort of neutral, being in a state of equanimity. But the paradox is it's because of that neutral state of equanimity that acts as the basis to be able to place those minds of love and compassion within the consciousness and bring them to perfection. But the problematic aspect of that equanimity, of that neutral character of the mind, is that it can also be influenced by the afflictions. So we can also be guided into the direction of anger, aversion, and attachment.
Copen Dograwas.
Ale, loso, loso, loso. And it is because of that sort of neutral state of the mind that, for example, a good person can fall under the influence of negative people and become more engaged with the afflictions.
Tenda which that tenda say so that Jeva in a say Coron Joan, Yapol Joatan, and Dujan and Joatan, Dujan Shulan, and the Data says at Tapare Manduas.
So this quality of the mind, the fact that it starts from a fundamental place of neutrality, and depending upon our habituation and attention, it can go towards what is unwholesome or it can go towards what is wholesome. This shows that the mind is something in a state of flux. It is not something that is permanent.
Tika Silnium Moshias and Aros Nasa, Tapares, Hakosara Tendigas sausage you are, says at Tapares, some sausage, say Nolotiliares.
Loso, loso.
Or Tinia Modoyares.
Karinyambo.
Tapare, some sausage and Aros.
Nado. Tabare ginyambo karre.
Just say Tamanja.
And so we can see that a lot of our problems, a lot of our confusion comes to grasping at what is impermanent as permanent, thinking that the mind is in a state of permanence when it is in a state of flux, when it is in a state of impermanence. So this close placement of a mindfulness on the mind helps us to realize that.
Hotakatano said to Nasa, Tapares and Anzomares, Canon La Togres. Ina say, did the pocket answer shoot over yours.
So when we say, like, if we had to say that, like, okay, the mind and the self, right, the I or the self are something that is impermanent, we can say that, or maybe we can even comprehend it intellectually. But if you look at our behavior, we can really see that we're stuck on this conception of them being permanent. And it is grasping at permanence and grasping at them having a self that is the cause of so many problems. We can see how this self-grasping ignorance is the kind of misunderstanding, the affliction that is at the root of conflicts between people, conflicts even between countries, wars, and so forth. And when we say that we have this grasping at permanence, we can see that from how we approach our life, right? We approach our life from planning what we're going to do tomorrow, next week, next month, or next year, right? We have that idea that we're still going to be around. So that shows how kind of ingrained this attitude of grasping at permanence is within us. But actually the reality is that out of all of us who are gathered here today, we don't know who's going to go first. We don't know if there's one of us who might even pass away tomorrow. But when we look at how we live our lives and how we plan our lives, it's almost as if we all think that we have 100 or even 200 years left. So when we talk about the last of these 4 close placements of mindfulness, the last of these 4 close placements of mindfulness is the close placement of mindfulness on phenomena. And when we talk about the different types of phenomena, we can say that there are kind of 2 categories: thoroughly afflicted phenomena and completely purified phenomena. If you want perhaps an easier way of kind of conceptualizing this, we can think that close placements of mindfulness on phenomena. Okay, so that's whatever wasn't included in the first 3. So it's not body, it's not feelings, or it's not mind. Then it goes into this last category, close placement of mindfulness on phenomena. Mikul. And also, when we come to this last category of close placement of mindfulness of phenomena, we see how vast this practice is. Because when we talk about body, mind, and feelings, it might seem that the objects there are a little bit limited. But we understand that phenomena is actually everything else. everything else within experience.
This one, that chi temanya gombala ten kenyamubi pujan de rendu. No yuguchi or Sigayate, Sel Gayate, Shiran de rendu, Lodo, Tanyambodo, Korani Hakujani Haku.
So on the basis of the close placement of mindfulness of phenomena, we can come to differentiate the phenomena which are of the completely afflicted class, which means things that are to be abandoned. And we can also understand which phenomena are of the completely purified class, which means that those are things to be taken up. Those are things to be realized with wisdom.
Tanda yare tene o digi nyembo zebase atere du o kaji kige pata never te to du soas yusona hakosarne lo dese atere to ani wo chayu yarwas.
And when we can cultivate that, for example, thinking that okay, anger is this negative type of mind, anger is this negative type of thing, its antidote is a patience. If I cultivate patience, this will help me to overcome anger. Then we realize the last of the Four Noble Truths, which is true paths. Sorry, nga tes go thongson karin sen nganso chitang nganso zepa dang control lab na namki nganso sem samlo thangi re dua yene dus chene samlo thana na konso che da wo chi jo gi re dua
misen ka yana ga ya da jete chito mun da sila ga ya res sila ga ya sila ga ya tinyo da mandi
lasa
ha ko sarwa chi ga ja she ga dala so ken nyemu bi chi an no jo ga chi ni ya ras ken nyemu bi chi sa control de te ji re ya res
yeah konso ba yana nga to ba yana konso den den yere nga chana. So on the basis of understanding what is completely afflicted, we know what we must abandon. And on the basis of understanding what is completely purified, we know what we must take up. So on the basis of knowing what to take up and on the basis of knowing what to abandon, we can then cultivate, engage in the behavior, and that will help us to cultivate true paths. So this is how to realize the Four Noble Truths on the basis of these four close placements of mindfulness. So, of course, if there's something that is not clear, then we, of course, welcome your questions. So I was confused. I was telling Geshe because we were talking about anger and patience and whatever in the context of phenomena, but to me, those are feelings. Right? Afflicted emotions are feelings. So I was wondering why we're talking about them here. Nga konsola lapa nga dokpa yore karin senda nganso di zepa dang control ina sorwa re dua ina nganso tanda chukola keche
shege kawana ina sono to yores tanda zoke ni nyemo bichi sane sa lode rache go yona tanda tenza sono to yores
ale loso
tenra kardu tu machu se yamares se kar so go jad
loso niga ja chogdes. So Geshe was saying that in the context of feelings, you can place anger and patience there, but also in the context of phenomena, especially what's supposed to be taken up and what's supposed to be abandoned, what is afflicted and what is completely purified, we can understand them in the context of this last close placement of mindfulness. Yeah. So in order also to think about it, if we think about it as mind, what are we trying to do through close placement of mindfulness on mind? We are trying to realize true cessations. If we want to realize true cessations, we definitely need to overcome anger. So therefore, it can be placed in both of these categories. And because these last of the two truths, true cessations and true paths, are actually both the things to be taken up or the things to be realized, they actually have a relationship with each other. Yeah, so whether we achieve a true cessation or not, right, that depends upon cultivating the true paths. So that is the ultimate sense of cultivating these 4 close placements of mindfulness. But if we cultivate those 4 close placements of mindfulness just with the mood of observation, that won't lead to these realizations and understanding, but it can help us to have a more relaxed, grounded mind.
어다 마냐니 헬레치네 자프게 노톤다 만다 저한다 만다 강에 요나 어다 세근도도 간디스렌데 리근도도 간디스렌데 저하다고 먹이 헬레서 따지잖아 되나 시라라에 배도 요바 어다 저하다고 그거야 말이지.
So if, for example, when we lay down to sleep, we become overwhelmed with a lot of thoughts, we become overwhelmed with a lot of emotions, we can practice these 4 close placements of mindfulness and just observe what emotions are arising now, what mind is arising now. And in this way, what we'll find is that through cultivating that quality of observation, we become much more relaxed. And along with that, we can maybe even develop a little bit of wisdom.
어다 좀에 비서 노토르지 치냐마 너지 코로팔 timballu게 대바는지 거이노야 레스트 되나.
And if we cultivate the mindfulness and that sense of attention, then it's just like those disturbances are just like clouds in the sky. Once the sun shines, they will be evaporated or absorbed.
어다 이제 요아다 스테마마지 아스 미빨 릴라메네 넘바 마종와 공바.
So when we take as our object of focus the close placement of mindfulness of the body, we take our attention to its aspect as being something that is unclean. And that's the antidote to grasping at what is unclean as being pure.
하고 사람 미빠데 리레스 마스 넘바데 다베텔 다 대초게 소마노지 많이 바데 야포 소마노지 많이 바데레스.
So each of these 4 close placements of mindfulness has the object and its aspect. So in the case of the body, the object is the body, and it's that aspect of uncleanliness. And this is focused on to reduce our attachment.
어다 미빠도 넘바 니레 지바요 아르다스 강갈.
Yeah, and this is the same for all of the other ones. Pe younger chiklabna? Nampa dang mipa younger chiklabna?
베나 셀 미빠 셀 소노토.
Yeah.
어때 따파 소마노지 따파레 넘바 못 따파레 소노토인데.
And when we focus on the mind, we take the object of mind and its aspect of impermanence. So when we focus our attention on the mind, we realize its state of fluctuation. So by taking that as our object, we realize its aspect of impermanence, which is the antidote to grasping at permanence.
어다 드리자 고자른 로비칼 롱기 체니를 소노토네 고자 바시기야레스 롱기 체니.
And when we are meditating in this sort of deep way, for example, on impermanence and so forth, then we are able to understand sort of what the nature of the self is as well.
다 시체니 고자선 자침보레스. 다 미빠지 무주아지 더진요도 못 따바레스.
But then when we take ourselves as the main object of focus and our mind to realize impermanence, that is a little bit limited. We can also cultivate that meditation of impermanence in a vast way to all general phenomena and see how all phenomena arise and fall away. And that is using the general as our object of focus rather than the self. And then we can talk about all contaminated phenomena as being in the nature of suffering. And then we go not just to our own feelings, right? We expand that beyond our feelings to looking at all phenomena, and we see how all phenomena are not lasting because they come from contaminated causes and therefore are in the nature of suffering. So when we say in the nature of suffering, this is different from just saying they are suffering. That's an important distinction. And also to understand in terms of feelings, when we are able to achieve higher states of realization, those feelings are less contaminated, and so they are not necessarily in the nature of suffering. So it is said that, for example, when you reach the Arya state, so a bodhisattva who has directly realized emptiness, unpleasant feelings are no longer experienced. The feeling of suffering is no longer experienced. Yeah, so when we realize that all contaminated phenomena are in the nature of suffering, or all phenomena that arise from causes are in the nature of suffering, you would think that that might be a depressing thing, but that understanding actually leads the bodhisattva to great happiness. So when we just look at that from the point of view of ourselves, of our own feeling, that's taking oneself as the object of focus. When we expand that to all phenomena, that's taking the general as the object of focus. And so when we look at the places that we inhabit, our house, our country, even beyond that, we call these samsara, right? And we understand that samsara is not a physical place. Samsara is that reality of those things being in the nature of suffering. Yes, lovely. Yeah, they. Yeah, but yeah. So our house, our country, and so forth, these are not samsara, right? Samsara is that state of being. However, they are in the nature of suffering. Yeah, and so this state of suffering, right, it's related to our 5 aggregates, including our body. Samsara is not some sort of outside place that we inhabit in that sense. We could say that it is an abode of samsara. So when we talk about these 4 close placements of mindfulness from the point of view of the result, we can talk about that in the sense of the 4 dharma seals, which is the final one. Nirvana is peace, right? That final peace can be realized based upon this practice. And so why we need to meditate, why we need to refute these 4 false conceptions, why we need to cultivate the antidote to the afflictions, is to get to that final destination of nirvana, that lasting state of peace. And if we talk about nirvana or liberation, just in a very kind of simple sense, we can talk about that state of the mind being free. That's really what it is. No longer under the control of karma and the afflictions. Yeah, so that's what we mean by nirvana is peace. Yes, and so we will end on that positive note of what does nirvana mean? It means that liberation from suffering. So Geshe and I will chant some very short verses to dedicate the merits, and then we can have questions. Changju semju rinpoche maje banam jejur ji jewa nyamba meba yang gone gondu bewar sho tongni tawa rinpoche maje banam jejur ji jewa nyamba meba yang gone gondu bewar sho. Through the merits that we have collected together, through this positive potential, may all the wars and conflicts taking place in the world be completely cleared away. Also, because I want to perfect the qualities of love within myself, the qualities of compassion and so forth, through these merits, may I have the physical health and the mental health necessary to be able to do that. May the sun of happiness shine equally upon all 6 types of sentient beings within samsara, and may I myself, through these merits, become capable of actualizing the welfare of all those beings. So we'll pause there. So if you have a question or a doubt like I did, they are most welcome. Does anyone have a question? So does anyone have a question? Yeah, Rudy, go ahead.
So is it all just a mental misunderstanding?
You mean the problem? When you say it's all a mental misunderstanding, what do you mean by all? Then in this chat song so semgi notu rebesa.
차츠원 우리 가와이 말와스 어다는 야세서 무슨 그거도 그anga 야보치 통 그거도 세제가나 대시 저기 있었다는 거 멜로자가 되지 야보치 주로
We can't really say that because wanting to practice kindness, wanting what is best for others, praying to be able to contribute to the welfare and the happiness of others, right? Those are good things.
소소가 링아 이해서가 제가 제일 소설 지도자 지주는 소설 기본만 두어스 예를 대해서는 내가 대해서 매 손으로나 개와 할래비 아버지 할래야지.
And we understand that by understanding that if we harm somebody with our body, speech, and mind, that is something negative, because if they harmed us in the same way, we would suffer. Then refraining from harming in that way, that's also something positive. It's a positive understanding. So that's kind of a positive sense in terms of what we're starting. And once we kind of have the basis of those positive things to cultivate in place, then we'll find that things get better and better.
So
we can't say that, because when thoughts are wholesome or positive, right, then that's a good thing, right? So our practice of meditation is actually to reduce those unwholesome thoughts so that our mind can hold the positive thoughts or qualities more effectively. Because we know that, right? Like, if we cultivate in meditation a feeling of closeness to all sentient beings, both humans and animals, and we are able to maintain that feeling of closeness, we're a much happier person when we go about our lives than before. But we can't hold that feeling of being close to all beings and thinking about their welfare. Why is that? It's because we don't have that habituation to it. So there was a great Lama, a great translator called Natso Lotsawa, and he wanted to go to India to be able to get more teachings to translate. And so he approached his master. Geshe thinks it may have been Drum Tunpa, and he said, in terms of, I know that I have to leave this country now, and I might not be able to come back here. So in terms of your last advice, in terms of what I need, what I should cultivate, and what I don't need, what would you share with me? Yeah. So he was already someone who quite knew, like, in terms of he was also an intelligent and learned person in terms of knowing what he needed to do. So the advice that the Lama said is when you go to that different country and different culture, you're going to meet lots of different people with lots of different ideas. So what you need to cultivate is a broad-mindedness, respecting every single person you encounter and not being attached to thinking that the way you think things should be is the way that they always have to be. And if you are able to cultivate that broad-mindedness wherever you go and whatever you meet, things will unfold very easily for you. Yeah. So that was one of the, he gave other advice, but that was really one of the most important. Yeah. So we see that a lot of our problems come from wanting people to have the same ideas, the same kind of politics, the same understandings that we have. And then when they disagree with us, that becomes a cause of difficulties. So this was the meaning of that kind of final piece of advice that he gave. Yes, go ahead, Rudy.
Are people and existence, are they all classified as phenomena?
강삭 당 시바기네 수 찻상와 쳬라 조기여레스 지든 소낭라 쳬라 조기여레스 So humans, yes, those other human beings are phenomena. The buildings that we're inhabiting, the things in our environment, these can all be classified as phenomena. And also when we talk about the and also when we talk about the body, we're not just talking about this unitary concept of the body. We're talking about all its physical components. So like the channels, the winds, the drops, the organs in our body, our outer body, our skin, all of those are in that category of body. So there's many different objects even just for that. Because when we say body, we have this kind of unitary body that comes forth, but this category of body also contains all its components. So they're divided to the outer body, the inner body, and parts of the body that are both outer and inner. So outer body is this physical body that we see, right? Like the outer surface. And inner body, especially in the subtle sense, this is the subtle body of like the energy channels, the chakras, and the winds and the drops that move through them. And so the body has many sort of coarser aspects that are easier to identify and many very subtle aspects. And this is even more so the case with the mind, right? It has many subtle and coarser aspects. Right? And so when we look at the bodies of others, that is said to be a body that is both external and internal. So when they see that body, when we see that body, we're looking mainly at the outer aspect. When that person is thinking about their own body, they have that sense of both the outer and the inner aspects. So mainly when we see the outer person, we don't have that sense of their inner body, but he or she has the sense of both the outer and the inner. Dave, go ahead. Yeah.
I felt like I missed something when Geshe was talking about phenomena being either completely afflicted or pure.
Yeah.
I didn't really get a sense of what is pure phenomena.
Oh yeah. So nganso the chögi kandeslagore sabche ni yere ro kuntu kandeslagore da kuntu nyomomba tamnyangcho namchongi chö sheda komaso namchugi chö kandeschi gresa
nojo chi sana ta damengesa to bishira 다 들리게 다 연보 가리나 대진도 요아래 돈에 도자로 도자고 요아래
Okay. Mi takpe sherab toni
또 방에서도 또
topich.
비시라.
Ngonsude topich.
방에서도 또 비시라.
Ane konso topja.
이 말에 야 콘서트 알레 노주고 치잖아.
Yeah. So completely purified phenomena, we can speak mainly, we speak about realizations. So the wisdom realizing impermanence, the wisdom realizing emptiness, and also the objects of attainment that arise due to those realizations. That's the completely purified class of phenomena.
파파카리노 코로스 지지 제바테 노주고 치조지래. 가르에서 nomba 제바티가 nomba 가르 파숑하시게 그래. 컨트롤 멤버 숑하시게 그래.
So for a bodhisattva also, a bodhisattva, an arya bodhisattva, so a superior bodhisattva's practice of patience, it will also be the completely purified class of phenomena. Karin-sana?
다 노주고 쪼르다스. 간주 질라용 거 다시 제바도 되지 요하러 왔어. 대주 노주고 치래시도.
Ale, loso. Because it is the antidote to that affliction of anger.
그래서 다 남행에서도 또 비시라 아주 주로 왔어. 기초 단지 말이 봐. 짜와되면 와서 기 들어왔어.
So similarly, the wisdom realizing emptiness, because it is that antidote to the ignorance grasping at the self, it is also a completely purified class of phenomena.
노바 숑하세를 봐 매와서 기 되게 요하러 왔어.
So a completely purified class means able to kind of defeat, it's able to defeat the afflicted class. That's kind of how it's measured.
다요 치세나 치테만 이제 치세한테 답이 치르자. 모델을 아니라 요거자요 요아래. 스탠더드 모델스다.
La.
치세나
Chusana.
답이 치 타바.
Tarpechu.
타바라서는 또
Reje.
하고서라와
Di namjongi ne sudrogire. Karisege tanda.
미미미 오 다테만 이제 요아또나 진짜 또 좋아요 아래. 치테만 이제 깔라 소설 무대 손으로 또 요아래. 소설로 대 손으로 또 요아래. 남들어.
And the other thing too is that when we talk about close placements of mindfulness of phenomena, we can talk about them from the aspect of true paths as well as from the aspect of true cessation. So that's another thing to keep in mind.
또내 가서 야 치속이 치테 답이 칠고 손으로 또 그거 아래. 이내잖아.
Je.
나도 치속이자 라기하러 왔어. 치사 가르에서 타와.
So when we talk about practicing dharma, which in the Sanskrit language is the same word for phenomena, we should say we're practicing the dharma of liberation, because it's a completely purified class of phenomena, that state of liberation. So we're not practicing the dharma, because then we could be practicing whatever phenomena. We're actually practicing the dharma of liberation. Yeah. So that's mainly what we think about when we think about dharma. Yeah, and of course all of the sort of other things that go along with that as well.
Yeah.
What exactly is phenomena? Is that anything like associated with something that's not fundamentally real or related in some way to emptiness?
Chösena nganso tongni samlo tangna chögi tse kandes chikyote. Rangshin gi drupa mayempa khariyana chörebes dilabna tigrebes. So yes, in the sense of emptiness, we could say that whatever lacks, whatever nominal thing abides lacking inherent existence is a phenomena. So you could say that, yes. Tenjung kariyana chöres labna tigrebes. So I proposed another one. Every dependent arising is a phenomena. Yes?
So we are phenomena, not dealing correctly with other phenomena in terms of purity or making mistakes or errors.
Yeah.
So neither one of us are real.
Then nganso yena nganso samlo tangna nganso chechikres nganso netso hamukone no trushogi then nganso paropo di konso yang no trushogi ine nganso yang ngune mares nganso mepares then samlo tangna
다 메파레스는 다 아마 정가파 있는 대로 세요 말했어. yenda yena uta chilu yenda yena manda chi haris ta te tumani gojabe kala.
So do you mean not real in the sense of not existing? Because I think the way I translated your question might have given... Yeah. So it's not that we're not here at all, right? We are here nominally. And what he was saying was Tsongkhapa's view, right? It was a little bit kind of, it says that it's not that we're not here at all, right? He makes an argument against that understanding. So we are here nominally. We are here nominally. We're just not here in the way that we think we are. We're not here in the way that we think we are because we don't exist from our own side and we don't exist inherently. It is a mental gymnastics, trust me. Yeah.
nganzo tapa yimba wo yo mares.
Yeah. Also, we're not permanent in the way that we think that we're permanent, right? That's also a misconception.
야 nganzo ngine zone ducha yimba te ngine chin yo mares nganzo. ngine chin nganzo yo bores nga sa de.
Yeah.
sonjigiri was.
And also, we're not the bad person that we think we are. We're grasping at those negative qualities and we have a bad opinion of ourselves. That's also not real in the sense that our mind has that aspect of pure luminosity, and due to that, we have the seed for Buddhahood. We have the Buddha of nature within us.
다 이나 nganzo ducha shulun ro de at nyodaso de at kares nyemoti ga neba shinin do yo was.
But why do we do mistaken things? Because covering that nature are those afflictions, and those afflictions lead us in the wrong direction.
리치 오가 두자 nga chowo yise te no de yo ares. nga sa de ta shimores. ina kwe nyemoti ga neba shin tani ko ducha shul tibar was.
So the sense of real thinking, I'm really bad or I'm really good, that is a little bit mistaken, because actually it all depends on what is unfolding with the mind. The potential of the mind is good, but if we allow ourselves to be influenced by the afflictions, we can be led towards what is unwholesome.
다 리코로 당기 가서 거자비 가로 맞송아래 처바 가야 시든 여러 뭐 지시에서 왔어. 요 리테 천천히 가서 밀리테 유지는 노벨이 졸라 바래. 그래서 왜 이때 대신 뭐 지자유.
And it's also not cut and dry. Like even when we talk about the human body, like today we talked about the human body as being something that is contaminated because of its causes, and because of that, it is in the nature of suffering. But we also talk about this human body in the sense of the precious human rebirth, that this is what allows us to perfect our mental qualities and reach liberation. So it's important to kind of understand both of these aspects and how to differentiate. So this body, it is contaminated, but at the same time, this body is the basis for being able to perfect and train our mind, and in this way, it is also something positive. But this body is not clean, solid, and beautiful in the way that attachment is, in the way that attachment would lead us to believe. So when we talk about the body being unclean, that's really what we're trying to target. Go ahead, sir. Yes, yes. So the jigten gishe den so nyana music di nyana roa di che chogi mares di duksha rebesa.
Mare ta nyemu shuchen ra ina
So Geshe would say, how is it affecting your mind, right? So if listening to it makes you feel more relaxed and happier, then of course you can listen. But if listening to a particular kind of music is bringing up like afflictions, like anger or aversion, then he would advise not. So it depends, actually.
So
if listening to music helps you kind of cultivate that neutral state of equanimity, kind of de-stress, or even if it helps you recollect something positive and cultivate a positive mindset, then absolutely no problem. Yes, Deki Lee, go ahead. Oh, you mean like, no, are you thinking, Dekili, of the true nature of our mind is pure luminosity and the afflictions are adventitious, which means they can be removed? Otherwise, I'm not sure what you're thinking of. Oh, you're thinking of the completely purified class of phenomena and the completely affected class of phenomena. Yes, yes. nganso di chugi ne so din so yero kundu nyomong gi che tang namjong gi che roa. So what was your question about those two? Sorry.
Geshe answered with the two views
Yeah.
and something objects.
Yeah.
So what, any idea, like an
Which
example,
views?
what are the objects?
Can you give the answer again? Can you respond
Okay.
again to this?
And what was your question? Remind me.
Or just, I think.
An example of the completely purified class of phenomena. That's what you're asking for, right? Okay. Namjong gi che pekashe laoshos kundu nyomong pe che pekashe laoshos.
야 레라버레 레라버레 빼나 조지세마 파파가 지라 시라 가리나
Yeah.
남행에서도 또 베시라 돈행에서도 또 베시라 숑바 니지 전주지 세강가 로로 노조가 지레스 가쇼데레스
So actually the completely purified class is easier because it's actually quite limited. So after the bodhisattva becomes an Arya, so after he or she is a superior bodhisattva, wisdom realizing emptiness, love, compassion, bodhicitta, any of those that arise within their mind stream are a completely purified class of phenomena.
제 도보데레스 간조지라 숑바 니지 전주지 뇨레 가리나 노조가 지자 주그레스
Ja, chogire.
레레스
Ale, lo
이나
so.
다체 도보 말와스
Less. And we have a, I hate this word, but I can't think of another one, similitude, something similar. We might, something similar, that's a lot better, less pretentious, right? So like we have something similar to that in our mind stream. We might not be an Arya Bodhisattva, but we have a little bit of love, a little bit of compassion, maybe even a little bit of a thought of bodhicitta. So while those aren't kind of completely purified class of phenomena in the fullest sense, they function as those for us.
다 대지슈 체르체르 로서는 넘바슈와 레강이네트 제용 그러와스
But when we take those as an ordinary being and we build on that love and we build on that compassion until we realize it, then it becomes that purified, completely purified class of phenomena at that level of realization.
다 녀무그리 다 쪼모고 요아리 되니 여러 뭐뭐 요아리 자자니 주니 녀녀시세니 요아르와
Yeah,
대지 강가 노 그는 녀무 비치레스
And if you wanted like the absolute example of the completely afflicted class of phenomena, we can think about the 3 poisons, the 6 root afflictions. We can think about and all of those things related to that.
보다 되야 그 거기 가데라와스
So they're in fact they're opposites, right? Completely purified class and completely afflicted class. I hope that answered your question, Deki Lee. Follow up if you'd like.
The objects that Geshe was referring to were things like bodhicitta.
Completely purified. Yes, yes. I know, because we say objects and it sounds funny. Yeah, nganso you love na nganso like cup double cheek samlo tangire dua rwa. Dene sem double cheek samlo tangire sa.
야야 단다 간조 치도 세세나 또 여코로 세베 세레 되어와스
Yeah.
세테마냐자 치테마냐자 잘라소나
Yeah.
얘도 레테네 열라용 시바모레 그러와스
So Geshe said, yeah, but they are objects, just like close placements of mindfulness on feelings, close placements of mindfulness of mind. You can talk about that close placement of mindfulness on the mind as an object that is being held within the mind, right? So it's a different sense of object. Yeah.
ng마이나 대학원은 이제워요 ng마이나 자가르이나 다 자가치로 뭐뭐요 와스 리지게서는 가로서 나세대한테 따바래
Yeah.
구자세대한테 따바래 핀보때 못 따바래 건설수 장이야
So a lot of these kind of discussions, they arose at a time in India where there were competing philosophies, right? Like non-Buddhist philosophies. And so some of those Buddhist philosophies were saying, sem dang
나세대한테 따바래 구자세대한테 따바래
ale. Sem dang sorwa
핀보도 대지 못 따바래
mitabares. So some were saying that the mind, the aggregates and so forth were impermanent, but the self, the person, was permanent. This was a very kind of popular view in Indian philosophies at the time.
대수치 뭐야 그랬어도 ng마이나 다그마무게 다나려요 추어와스
And perhaps they're even still being held today. Geshe is not sure. But a lot of this was aimed at refuting those misconceptions.
어떤 오라 다 총바된지 대셔바보래 어수자에 건도 지세 첨보지 요하르다스
And they had compelling reasons for some of the things they believed. For example, they could make a very compelling reason for Brahma, the creator God, as being the creator of the world.
좀벌리데 파포네는 메바차 안내는 덤보 치시게 다 총바데 치시요 하레스 좀벌리 덤보 용게데 다 총바데 치시 용기요 하레스
용기요레스.
총바데 코로찌고 끼고메 이사 나 로파스 주나서 메칼 콘조질 하나 모벌레가 이사 강가 코로기 지자 소소요 하레스
And so they said that what happened is that Brahma, the divinity of the creator, was in the world. And he was in the world by himself. And he was kind of bored. So he thought, like, I need beings and things to interact with. And because he was all powerful, on the basis of that wish, the process of creation started to unfold, right? Like in the Vedic mythology, right? It starts to unfold.
다 코로고 지요 so 요아레 젠다죠 키 지소 소스지 요아레스
Yeah. 하고선.
다 라젠다르지요
Allez,
이제 셰버버 강가 코레드 소스 제세테 제세치몬디 와스
going that la jendagden so kanes.
라젠다르지요 라 총비가 간조 지소 소노
Allez,
라 총바 코로 가로 지와 이네 소노톤 콘달레스 제요아레스
Allez, and even the other sort of divinities of the world, they also thought that I wasn't here before Brahma, so I kind of arose here through Brahma's intention, right? And that's how the universe
미
unfolded.
제센디 와스 카르 카만도 제센디 와스 간조선 테 마레 렌 데코로 tumba 차네라 아 레젠다 레비칼 테니제네 레기 토지마 르마지데 레용기 아레스
Le tambo di ngoma di zone me bachagi re dene.
바tum바 차네라
Yeah, dene le chikla tene tsulegi
라이네 마서
The Buddhist conception of that isn't completely different than the Vedic. It's just not a personal aspect. So what we think is the universe that was there before, the karma for that universe, or let's just say that world's exhausted. So you have that process of dissolution, and then there's an expansiveness. There's nothing there. But there's a karmic latency that still abides. As that becomes more powerful, then new karma begins to unfold, and the world arises again. So they're not completely conflicting understandings, but they're different.
고마님에서 또 몰라 와 레기 토지 이네서는 슈마르 와스
Ale, losu.
고마님 주코르마
Sugamne marwa. Ale, nganso pep
좀을 또 모차베 갈라
nampadi hak
노바이나
di kelengirebe.
간조 노바이나
Ale, loso.
좀을 또 모차베 갈라
Yeah.
사 좀바이님에서
And in fact, in the Buddhist belief system, there's a lot of views that are holding that actually what karma does is karma compels Brahma to come from the formless realm into our desire realm, or to come from the form realm into our desire realm. And that is one of the conditions which permits the unfolding of the world. Of course, in this case, he's more like an agent of karma than anything else.
야 좀을 또 모차베 갈 하산면 고지 테네 원하자 같은 녀도 참 갈래
Ozayasana?
원이야
One kare.
데코니야
Degamneya.
또 보이니만 고지
Ale,
레기
loso.
간조 있는 레기 토지레스
So what happens when the universe kind of disappears is the desire realm might not be there, but the form and the formless realms are still there. So what has to happen is a karma has to happen, which is moving beings from the form realm into the desire realm, for example.
이나 미 당게든 다 알레 모터스 다 드레스나 디디요
Go ahead, Dave. Yeah.
Yeah, this is a question from Facebook. The question was how to reconcile the concepts of free will, however you want to express that, and the karmic compulsion.
Yeah. Nganso rangwang yere sergi dua roa ine nganso di ledong nyomongi ola chikre dua denso ni nyamdu kande samlo tangoresa.
다 시워시는 간존 롱요아르에서는 롱요아 말레스 따따 카투스제나
If we look at the situation directly, we can't really say we have freedom. We'd have to say we lack freedom, actually.
가르세를 다 고알되어 와스
Because we're in this state of samsara, which is a state of being compelled.
다 이나요 소수 여보 제바 이나 제 토야가 오롱 자수지 요아레스
But the trick is, we are in samsara and we are in this situation, but if we do things correctly, we have a chance at freedom. So we can't say we have freedom. We have a chance at it.
내가 따따 지금 말 와서 기워서 되야 되지
Yeah, so that would be his answer.
So we have, just to follow on, I mean, this person on Facebook would follow on, if our karma is compelling us,
Yeah.
or if our afflictions are kind of compelling us to pay attention to the things that cause suffering, what gives rise to the capacity to choose a better path?
Okay, good question. Yeah, nganso tanda rangwang mepagi netsudi, dunga nyongya gi netsudi, nganso di ngomagi kandes lagredi gomdang bakchadang nyomongden sola tene yogis. Ine nganso lam yarge droegi gokap karitegi yores. Netsungene dende dapo yena?
미미 밑에 지어가 맞대고 다 멀리 매일이 아버지 된도 와스 대고 내가 녀먹을 때 말해 봤어
Well, karma and affliction aren't completely negative in that sense, in that we rebirth, right, in samsara happens due to karma and affliction. But it just so happens that due to karma and affliction, we've taken a human rebirth this time around. And that gives us some capacity to do something.
다 소소가 곰 가르자바 있는데 다 가르 먹이 가르자바 있는 다 타발은 로야 손질은 로야 강가 소소 우자 요반다고 지요하레스.
And because of that, then on the basis of this human body, if we meditate, if we cultivate positive mental qualities, if we listen to the teachings and so forth, then we can reach that state of liberation.
야 지말라 리바 그세 동벌은 간저도 지바라와스 소소 타마반다고 지레도와스 야와 에사와 달라마 모보요하레스.
So Milarepa, Gyowa, and Sapa, a lot of these great kind of practitioners, they were in the exact same state as us, but in one lifetime they achieved liberation.
하고서와 오다 디바 모보사 강에 모보체 드니자 녀다 모보요와스.
So, and in the beginning of their lives, they were afflicted, and like Milarepa did a lot of I mean, I know people don't like the word sin, but he killed a bunch of people. I mean, if that's not a sin, what is? So he did a lot of really negative things in the beginning of his life, right? Digpa in that sense is really kind of more like sinful than unwholesome, right? Because it's a strong negative thing. But Milarepa got enlightened in that same life. Vasubandhu wrote all sorts of horrible things, kind of like denying the Dharma and refuting it, but he was able to achieve realization in that lifetime. And even the Buddha Maitreya told Vasubandhu that because of these negativities, you won't be able to meet me in this lifetime, but if you purify, you'll be able to meet me in the future lifetime. Ah. Ngamja, yeah, ngamja. Jamchu dengadi. So it is said that he had to compose 500 volumes of text to purify that karma. Los Vasubandhu. And the most important of those is known as the Abhidharma Kosha, which is studied until this day in, for example, the three great seats.
So from all of samsara, then being human is the only place really where we have a lot of choice. But then within human realm, it's knowledge or understanding that gives us this choice.
I don't think you're going to get an answer to that. Just trying to think how I can say it that will give you an answer.
Well, what gives us this capacity?
A capacity, yeah, because
human beings are.
Yes, no, it's true, it is. Nganso inenganso milu rimbache di yeres, inenganso damkache yarge droegi dambadi kandis levge yeres, roa di kandis yongi yeres.
야, 다 대도 소소가 니만 좋았 비아수 다수
Di segyo mare. Mi kashe konso lumpala chikyang yarge droegi go kapi omares, roa di karela tene chongi yeres egide.
가르라 때리 쉬운
Damka so to biadi. Yarge droegi dopa tambochik levgo giredua. Mi kashe di dopa di omares. Mi kashe di dopa yeres. Di kandis yongi yeres.
미다 대도 소소 레와 고신 따지소야 와스 오당아 야지스 도거거든 오타 가르라 때리 베제 도거거든
Yene di kandis legi yere.
그 간에서 레그레세나 칼라
Mare mi kashe dende legi omares. Roa di kare chesonse.
센터 대고 제 소소 두보 있는데 라자 가르자 그건데 따네 때 조서야라 마트 제 가르서가
Yeah, so Geshe said this is a question without an answer. So, I mean, because I was kind of like saying, well, because he's saying, like, well, you make a decision to do something better. And I'm like, well, how come some people do that and some people don't? Well, it's because your friends or your family or the place you are, the influences, right? Like, I don't think there's like a definitive answer. He wants to tell a story related to this anyway. Oh.
뭐지 하고 살아 왔어 지말라 리방 안도 노지 요비 가치라 라마 여보 코로도 여보 차 살아 왔어 여보레스 이나 룸바텔 말 네와시게 할레베 마두차지 요하레스
Los.
문요다 차워 실라나 게 여보 가지는 제녀로 맞지지.
So at the time of Milarepa, and by this time he was already kind of like a greatly realized Lama and practitioner, there was another person in that place who was always causing problems and caused a great deal of suffering, and nobody could sort of convince him to change.
아니 그 저거로 요하레스 저거
Oh, and he would often go hunting.
아니 말라리 봐. 그 저거 이
Zio Jogieris, Medage Jogieris.
저거
Zio,
바지도 던져 왔더니 저거
sorry.
나왔어.
And he was and he was a herdsman. He would herd sheep and goats and so forth.
되는 로비가 지 말라 다 콘조 와치도 그건 뒤에서 놓더니 그래서 배세요 하러 왔어.
And Milarepa thought, like, what can I do to sort of get him to change his mind, to make a choice to do something better?
건도 년도로 대마카신로 되는 근년도 깨져셔야 되는 되는 걸로 바뀌다가 보시는 또 먹기 여러 지요 말했어.
And he tried many times. He would go with him when he was like herding the sheep and the goats and tried to talk to him, but no matter what he said, this person didn't want to listen.
다 뒤주고 사월에 다 됐어.
So it's a bit of a heavy story, but anyway.
다 되는 영화 지르세는 특히 말라리 왜 못들었으니. 빼나 잼바 mất 뭐 싱아지요나.
Sumyere jingaye.
당가지 가서 하는. 서 할래 그래서 또 와. 콘저 드라치가 타마 세세이나스.
Je.
콘저 잔이 되는 기계래 야가래 콘저 기워지는 되는 촌버지는 되는 야가래스.
So if there was 5 people sitting in a prison cell together, and they had their date of execution chosen for them, would it be better for them to sit there happily and try to get along together, or do they want to spend their last days in the world fighting with each other?
그걸 도와주니까 다 대전자마자 문도야 기워지는 되는 야가래 왔어.
Yeah.
드라치 건도.
And so then the person said, well, yeah, if they're only going to live for like a week or whatever, of course you don't want to fight anymore. Of course they're going to try to get along.
다 터닝 안 좋은 나월에 문도였어. 가서 로자가 너 강가래서 뭐다 그셔서만 로가서 왔어.
And then Milarepa said, well, aren't we all like that? Okay, some of us might live to 100 years if we're lucky, but then we know that at the end, karma and affliction is going to take us elsewhere. So we also have a life sentence. In that way. So if we're harming each other and hurting each other in just the little amount of time we have left in this body, that also doesn't make sense. And on that basis, that ripened something within him that made him want to change. And he became a much better person. So we can sometimes, through the influence of a wise and knowing advisor or somebody like that, we can be brought to change in a positive way, to make a positive choice. But it's said to be difficult, right? Changing a really negative person into a positive one is like rolling a boulder up a mountain. Yeah. But taking a good person and having them fall under negative behavior is like the stream that's going downstream from the mountain. That happens a lot more easily. Yeah. So it's not easy. So that's an important piece of thing to consider. Yeah.
Oh yeah, this one.
Rudy, last question. Yes, Rudy, go ahead.
Is contamination a central feature of samsara or existence? I don't really understand why that is. I sort of get the feeling that Buddhists think existence is a bad idea. And I don't understand. Is there any teaching where contamination is not a factor?
Not so. Yeah, it's a real drag, eh? My mom says that to me sometimes. Yeah, sagche nganso di kandesla gre sangi din so chatsangwa sagche res nganso korwa nangla sagche mepa chikyang yomare bes ane dene di sangi din so konso sipa pet migawa chikre dus kandes chikres.
말을 씨발 간내는 다 자로 뭐지 나셔와는 셔와라 생제 마주 봐도 생제가 돼야 할까 그거요 마도 같이 다시 저기 메시지 왔어.
So we can't say that they don't like existence or they don't want to exist because like if you look at His Holiness the Dalai Lama, right? And maybe you think he's a Buddha or he's enlightened. He wants to come back into existence again and again to help others. So it's not like the Buddhas are against existence.
자와 겐데 봐 담마세 타말라 다진로야 그 류대요 살아와. 하고 살아와. 근데 거로 기주 개박 개라지 머리 다 뭐체도 시와지마 다진로야 거로 따도 참아 뭐요 알아왔어.
Yeah.
시바레스. 대시비칼 오 나텐 대원메다스.
And
생제 마주 봐도 뭐
And it is said that the first Dalai Lama, whose name was Gendundrup, he had very clear signs that he was going to go to the Pure Land. But actually, he said to his students that, I don't want to be reborn in the Pure Land. I want to come into existence again and again to benefit sentient beings. So in that sense, it's not like the Buddhas are against existence.
But he comes back to tell you to leave, doesn't he?
Ine sipa tsulab di cherong sipa ne pardrogo giredu asti tes cancel up.
Municipal control kaledi yo mar nganzo rumo yo banu jindo nganzo tar pena tanda liwa jenda chinbo ni ton ta bulletin le banu jire nganzo ramdu as.
Yeah.
Eno ji konzo yo to yo.
Well, for them, it's not a problem because when you're realized, you can just decide where you want to go within existence, just like if you decided you wanted to come here to Burlington today and you were able to drive here relatively easily. For the realized beings, it's like that. But for us, it's not like that at all, right? Our existence is kind of compelled, right? We don't have any freedom. Yeah, but once the self kind of achieves that state of freedom, achieves that state of realization, then existence is no longer a problem because you're not compelled by it. Oh, yeah. Because in Buddhism, of course, we're holding that this life is not the end of the story, right? That we call the self and that we call the mind continue from lifetime to lifetime in the future. It's house when we change these physical bodies. Yeah. So we'll end the session here because we are quite a bit over time. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, so please hold a little bit in your mind about the instructions for meditation and see which ones are easier to apply. And also the relationship between the 4 close placements of mindfulness, the 4 misconceptions holding what is unclean as clean and so forth, and the 4 noble truths.